19-year-old Chloe Gallagher stood in the freezing rain with exactly $14 to her name, watching the iron gates of her family's Seattle estate slam shut. Disowned and destitute, she thought her life was over. But a dead man's letter and a decaying, storm-battered lighthouse were about to rewrite her entire destiny. To understand the absolute free-fall of Chloe Gallagher's life, you have to understand the man who pushed her over the edge. Her father, Richard Gallagher. Richard was the ruthless CEO of Gallagher Pacific Marine, a multi-million-dollar shipping conglomerate based out of Seattle, Washington. He was a man who viewed his family not as loved ones, but as assets to be managed. When Chloe's mother passed away from breast cancer when Chloe was just 9, Richard didn't grieve. He simply restructured his life, marrying a frosty socialite named Beatrice less than a year later. By the time Chloe turned 19, she was the ultimate disappointment to her father. She had no interest in corporate law, no desire to marry the arrogant sons of his board members, and worst of all, she had secretly enrolled in a marine biology program at the University of Washington, instead of the Ivy League business school Richard had handpicked. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in late November. Richard had discovered the tuition receipts. The confrontation in his mahogany-paneled study was brutal and brief. "You are a parasite on my legacy," Richard had sneered, standing behind a desk that cost more than most people's homes. "If you want to study fish, you can do it on your own dime. You are no longer a Gallagher." Within an hour, Beatrice had the household staff pack Chloe's essential belongings into heavy-duty trash bags. Her phone, paid for by the company, was confiscated. Her bank accounts, linked to her father's master accounts, were frozen. She was escorted off the property by private security. For 3 agonizing weeks, Chloe lived in her beat-up 2008 Honda Civic, sleeping in a 24-hour gym parking lot in Tacoma. She ate ramen noodles dry from the packet and washed her hair in the gym's public sinks. The sheer, biting reality of poverty was suffocating. She was entirely alone. Then came the letter. It was forwarded to a P.O. box she had hastily set up, sent by a boutique law firm located in downtown Portland, Abernathy, Reed, and Carmichael. The letterhead was crisp, thick parchment. It requested her immediate presence regarding the estate of her late maternal grandfather, Arthur Pendleton. Chloe hadn't seen her grandfather in 10 years. Arthur had been a rugged, eccentric maritime historian who despised Richard Gallagher with every fiber of his being. After Chloe's mother died, Richard legally blocked Arthur from seeing her, claiming the old man was a delusional hoarder. Arthur had passed away 6 months prior, but the execution of his will had been delayed by complex legal stipulations. Desperate, Chloe scraped together enough gas money to drive down to Portland. She sat in the immaculate, glass-walled office of Thomas Abernathy, shivering in her oversized thrift store sweater. "Your grandfather was a very cautious man, Miss Gallagher," Mr. Abernathy said, adjusting his silver-rimmed glasses. He pushed a thick, sealed manila envelope across the desk. "He knew your father would try to seize whatever he left behind. So Arthur established a blind trust. Richard has no idea this asset exists, and legally, he cannot touch it." "Asset?" Chloe asked, her voice raspy from a lingering cold. "Grandpa Arthur was broke. Dad always said he lived in a shack." Abernathy offered a tight, sympathetic smile. Arthur owned property. Specifically, he owned the title to the Hollow Shoals Lighthouse, situated on a privately owned 2-acre peninsula on the rugged northern coast of Oregon, just south of Cannon Beach. It was decommissioned by the Coast Guard in 1982, and Arthur bought it at a private auction. He left it entirely to you, Chloe, free and clear. He handed her a heavy, rusted brass key. "There's no cash," Abernathy added gently, "but the land itself is yours. It's a roof over your head." 2 days later, Chloe's Honda Civic sputtered down a muddy, overgrown coastal road that felt like the edge of the earth. The towering Sitka spruce trees closed in around her like cage bars until the road abruptly ended. There, standing against the furious, churning grey waters of the Pacific Ocean, was the Hollow Shoals Lighthouse. It was simultaneously breathtaking and terrifying. The tower was 60 feet of weathered white brick, scarred by decades of salt and wind. Attached to the base was the old keeper's cottage. The roof was missing shingles, the windows were boarded up with rotting plywood, and the air smelled heavily of iodine and decaying kelp. It was entirely isolated. The nearest neighbor was over 5 miles away. Chloe unlocked the heavy oak door of the cottage, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the air was freezing and stale. Dust motes danced in the slivers of grey light. The furniture was draped in yellowing sheets. There was no electricity, no running water, and a terrifying silence that seemed to press against her eardrums. But as she dropped her bags onto the hardwood floor, a strange sense of ownership washed over her. It was dilapidated. It was freezing. But it was hers. Richard Gallagher couldn't evict her from this. For the first time in a month, Chloe slept in a bed, wrapped in 3 heavy wool blankets she found in a cedar chest, listening to the violent crash of the ocean against the cliffs below. She had no idea that beneath her very feet lay a secret that would threaten to tear her family's empire apart. Surviving the first week at Hollow Shoals was a brutal test of endurance. Chloe spent her remaining few dollars on a camp stove, a kerosene lantern, and non-perishable food from a hardware store in town. During the day, she worked tirelessly to make the cottage habitable. She scrubbed decades of grime from the original hardwood floors, ripped the rotting plywood off the windows to let the pale winter sun in, and managed to get the cast-iron wood stove in the parlor working. By her second week, the physical labor had become a strange sort of therapy. The lighthouse was a labyrinth of maritime history. Her grandfather had left the place packed with artifacts, brass compasses, dusty logbooks from the 1800s, and intricate glass buoys. But the massive brick tower itself remained completely empty, save for the terrifyingly steep spiral iron staircase leading up to the glass lantern room. It was on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month after she had been thrown out of her father's house, that a massive coastal squall hit Hollow Shoals. The wind howled like a wounded animal, shaking the very foundations of the brick cottage. The rain lashed against the glass in horizontal sheets. Chloe was huddled by the wood stove, wearing 2 sweaters, reading one of Arthur's old journals by the flickering light of her kerosene lantern. October 14th, 2015. The journal read, "Richard thinks he has erased the past. He thinks the paper trail was burned in the warehouse fire of '98. The arrogant fool doesn't realize the ocean always keeps its receipts. The foundation is secure. The girl's inheritance is buried deeper than his sins." Chloe frowned, tracing the faded ink. Warehouse fire of '98? She vaguely remembered her father's company suffering a catastrophic loss when she was a toddler, a fire that miraculously resulted in a massive insurance payout, catapulting Gallagher Pacific Marine into the stratosphere. Suddenly, a violent crack of thunder rattled the cottage, followed by a strange metallic groan that didn't sound like the wind. It sounded like shifting iron. Chloe grabbed her lantern, her heart pounding against her ribs. She crept out of the parlor and into the short, enclosed brick corridor that connected the cottage to the base of the lighthouse tower. This area was the old oil room, where keepers used to store hundreds of gallons of whale oil. It was entirely paved in heavy cobblestones. She lowered the lantern. The floor was wet. Water was seeping in from the storm, pooling in the center of the room. But it wasn't just pooling. It was draining in a perfect, straight, rectangular line. Chloe dropped to her knees, ignoring the freezing dampness seeping through her jeans. She ran her fingers along the stone. There was a seam, a perfectly cut 6 by 4 foot rectangle disguised within the chaotic cobblestone pattern. Her grandfather's words echoed in her head. The foundation is secure, buried deeper than his sins. Frantic now, Chloe began searching the walls. The old oil room was lined with heavy iron utility hooks bolted into the brick. She grabbed the largest one, normally used for hanging block and tackle gear, and pulled it. Nothing. She moved to the next one, on the third hook. Hidden behind a rusted iron pipe, she felt it give. With a deafening, grinding screech of unoiled gears, the rectangular section of the cobblestone floor slowly sank 3 inches, then slid back beneath the foundation, revealing a yawning, pitch-black void. A blast of stale, dry air hit her face. It smelled of old paper, engine oil, and something metallic. Trembling, Chloe held the lantern over the edge. A set of narrow concrete stairs spiraled downward into the earth, directly beneath the lighthouse tower. This wasn't on any architectural blueprint she had found. She swallowed hard, gripped the lantern tightly, and began to descend. The stairs went down at least 20 feet, well below the cliff's surface level. At the bottom, her lantern illuminated a heavy steel maritime door, the kind used for bulkheads on military submarines, complete with a rusted turning wheel. It took every ounce of Chloe's body weight to turn the wheel, the metal protesting loudly until the heavy latch finally gave way with a heavy clack. She pulled the door open and stepped inside. Chloe gasped. She wasn't standing in a dirty, flooded cellar. She was standing in a massive, poured concrete bunker that had been meticulously climate-controlled at some point. The walls were lined with heavy metal shelving. On the left side of the room sat dozens of wooden crates, all stamped with faded black ink. Property of the U.S. Treasury, 1928. With a crowbar she found resting on a nearby table, Chloe pried the lid off the nearest crate. The lantern light caught the reflection, sending a dazzling, blinding flash through the dim room. Silver. Row upon row of tarnished, heavy silver bullion bars. It was a Prohibition-era smuggler's cache, likely hidden on this coast nearly a century ago, and her grandfather had somehow found it. There had to be millions of dollars worth of silver in this room alone. But it was the center of the room that made Chloe's blood run cold. Sitting on a pristine oak desk was a modern, heavy-duty, fireproof safe. Resting on top of the safe was a manila envelope with her name written on it in her grandfather's sprawling handwriting. For Chloe, when you are ready to burn his empire to the ground. Hands shaking violently, Chloe tore open the envelope. Inside was the combination to the safe, along with a single photograph. It was a picture of her father, Richard Gallagher, standing next to her grandfather, Arthur, taken perhaps 25 years ago. But Arthur had a bruised, swollen face, and Richard was holding a piece of paper, smiling a cold, dead-eyed smile. Chloe inputted the combination, her mother's birthday. The safe clicked open. Inside were ledgers, decades of original, handwritten accounting books belonging to Gallagher Pacific Marine. But as Chloe opened the first ledger, dated 1997, she realized these weren't shipping manifests. They were blackmail records, offshore wire transfers, and concrete proof that Richard Gallagher's entire initial fortune was built on smuggling illicit cargo through Arthur's coastal property, and that Richard had orchestrated the '98 warehouse fire to destroy the evidence and collect the insurance money, framing a rival business partner who went to federal prison for it. Her grandfather hadn't just left her a lighthouse. He had left her a loaded gun aimed directly at the head of the Gallagher empire. Chloe was a billionaire in silver, and she held the key to her father's destruction. A fierce, unfamiliar smile touched her lips. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the victim. She was the executioner. But her moment of triumph was violently shattered. Upstairs, rising above the howling wind of the storm, came a sound that made her heart stop. Boom! 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 Someone was hammering violently on the heavy oak door of the cottage. Chloe froze. It was midnight. The road was impassable in this weather. No one knew she was here, except the lawyer. Then came a voice, muffled but unmistakable, echoing down through the open floor grate above. "Chloe, open the door! I know you're in there." It was the deep, commanding roar of Richard Gallagher. He had found her. And if he found this basement, she wouldn't just be disowned. She would disappear. The midnight siege panic, raw and metallic, flooded Chloe's veins. Her father wasn't just a corporate bully. He was a man who routinely destroyed lives to protect his margins. If he found the silver, he would steal it. If he found the ledgers, she wouldn't make it off this peninsula alive. Her hands moved with frantic, adrenaline-fueled precision. She shoved the ledgers back into the fireproof safe, slamming the heavy steel door shut and scrambling the combination dial. She grabbed her kerosene lantern and sprinted up the narrow, concrete spiral stairs, her boots echoing violently against the walls. Above her, the heavy oak door of the cottage splintered with a sickening crack. Chloe threw her weight against the submarine-style bulkhead door at the top of the stairs, turning the rusted iron wheel until the latch locked into place. She scrambled up through the open cobblestone trapdoor into the oil room. The wind was screaming through the cottage now. The front door had given way. She grabbed the rusted iron utility hook on the wall and yanked it downward. With an agonizingly slow grind, the rectangular stone slab began to slide horizontally back over the abyss. "Chloe, I know you're in this rotting heap," Richard's voice boomed from the parlor, followed by the sound of glass shattering. He wasn't alone. She could hear the heavy, methodical footsteps of a second man walking across the hardwood floor. The cobblestone slab was 3 inches from closing. 2 inches. 1. It clicked shut, blending seamlessly into the chaotic stone pattern of the floor, just as the beam of a high-powered tactical flashlight swept into the brick corridor. Chloe blew out the kerosene lantern, plunging herself into darkness, and stood up, her chest heaving. "Well, well," Richard Gallagher sneered, stepping into the oil room. He was wearing a custom-tailored waterproof trench coat, looking utterly out of place in the decaying maritime ruin. Beside him stood a man the size of a commercial refrigerator. Chloe recognized him instantly. Harrison Croft, an ex-private military contractor who served as the head of Gallagher Pacific Marine's fixer unit. "Dad," Chloe said, forcing her voice to stop trembling. "You're trespassing." Richard laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that cut through the thunder. "Trespassing? On this pile of rubble? Your little lawyer Abernathy is good, I'll give him that. But nobody hides real estate from Kroll Associates. I had my intelligence firm, run a deep-dive audit on Arthur's blind trust within an hour of your little meeting in Portland. He stepped closer, the tactical flashlight illuminating the harsh lines of his face. He looked dangerous. He looked desperate. Arthur didn't leave you this pathetic lighthouse out of sentimentality, Richard hissed, grabbing Chloe by the collar of her oversized sweater. He was a paranoid hoarder who spent 20 years threatening to destroy me. He hid things, documents. Where are they, Chloe? I don't know what you're talking about, she choked out, her feet barely touching the ground as he lifted her. He left me a deed. That's it. Look around. It's an empty, rotting tower. Richard threw her backward. Chloe hit the damp brick wall, gasping for air. Tear the place apart, Richard ordered Croft. For the next 2 hours, Chloe sat shivering in the corner of the oil room, while Harrison Croft methodically dismantled her grandfather's cottage. He flipped the heavy cedar chests, smashed the vintage glass buoys, and tore the rotting floorboards up with a crowbar. He ran his tactical light over every inch of the cobblestone floor where Chloe sat. But the seam of the hidden trap door was perfectly disguised by the irregular mortar lines. Finally, Croft emerged from the parlor, shaking his head. Nothing, sir. It's just garbage. Richard's jaw clenched. He looked at Chloe with a mixture of disgust and absolute fury. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded legal document, throwing it at her feet. That is a quitclaim deed, Richard said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You are going to sign this property over to me by Friday noon. If you don't, I will have my medical board declare you mentally unfit, a traumatized teenager suffering from delusions after her grandfather's death. I will seize power of attorney. I will institutionalize you. And I will bring a wrecking ball to this entire peninsula by Monday morning. He leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and peppermint. You are out of your depth, little girl. Sign it. Without another word, Richard and Croft walked out into the storm, leaving the ruined front door swinging violently on its hinges. Chloe sat in the darkness, listening to the roar of their SUV engine fading into the tempest. She was freezing, battered, and terrified. But as her fingers brushed against the cold cobblestone floor beneath her, a dangerous foucault ignited in her stomach. Richard thought she was out of her depth. He didn't realize she owned the ocean. By dawn, the storm had broken, leaving the Oregon coast bathed in a brilliant, cold sunlight. Chloe didn't waste a single second. She didn't clean up the wreckage of the cottage. Instead, she opened the trapdoor, went down into the bunker, and packed fennel-specific ledgers into a waterproof duffel bag, along with a single, tarnished silver bar. She drove straight to Portland. She didn't go to her lawyer first. She went to the one entity her father couldn't buy, the Portland field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sitting in a sterile, fluorescent-lit interrogation room, Chloe slid the duffel bag across the metal table to Special Agent Robert Higgins, a veteran investigator in the White-Collar Crime Division. My father is Richard Gallagher, CEO of Gallagher Pacific Marine, Chloe said, her voice steady and resolute. In that bag is a silver bullion bar, stamped by the U.S. Treasury, part of a cache worth an estimated $18 million. But more importantly, beneath it are the original handwritten financial ledgers from 1997 to 2005. They contain absolute proof of offshore wire fraud, organized smuggling, and the premeditated arson of the Seattle Port Warehouse in 1998. Agent Higgins, a man who had spent 20 years chasing corporate phantoms, slowly opened the first ledger. As he scanned the meticulous, damning handwriting of Richard's criminal enterprise, the color drained from his face. Miss Gallagher, Higgins breathed, looking up at her with a mixture of shock and profound respect. We've suspected him for a decade, but we never had the paper trail. Where on earth did you get this? My grandfather kept the receipts, Chloe replied simply. But we have a problem. My father plans to bulldoze the evidence by Monday. We have to move now. The trap was set with terrifying efficiency. Agent Higgins brought in the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and a forensic accounting team from Deloitte to verify the ledgers. The evidence was irrefutable. Richard had not only committed arson to claim a $50 million insurance payout, but he had systematically framed his former business partner, sending an innocent man to federal prison. Friday morning arrived. Richard Gallagher sat in his penthouse office overlooking the Seattle skyline, sipping espresso. He checked his diamond-encrusted watch. It was 11:45 a.m. Chloe hadn't called. He smiled grimly, reaching for his phone to call his medical team to initiate the voluntary psychiatric hold. He never made the call. At exactly 11:50 a.m., the glass doors of Gallagher Pacific Marine's executive suite were shattered by a tactical battering ram. Over 30 armed federal agents poured into the headquarters, seizing servers, locking down elevators, and freezing every corporate account. Agent Higgins walked into Richard's office, bypassing the screaming executive assistants. He didn't say a word. He just threw a pair of heavy steel handcuffs onto the mahogany desk. "Richard Gallagher," Higgins said, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "You are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit arson, and tax evasion. Your assets are officially seized." Richard's face contorted in rage. "You have nothing on me. This is a witch hunt." "Actually," a calm voice said from the doorway. Richard whipped around. Chloe stood there, flanked by Thomas Abernathy. She was no longer wearing oversized thrift store clothes. She wore a sharp, tailored black blazer, looking every inch the formidable heir to an empire. "They have the ledgers from 1998, Dad," Chloe said, her eyes locked onto his. "The ones you thought burned. Grandpa Arthur hid them under the Hollow Shoals Lighthouse. You should have spent less time worrying about my tuition, and more time worrying about the foundation you built your life on." The realization hit Richard like a physical blow. His knees buckled. For the first time in his life, the untouchable titan of Seattle shipping looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. As the agents hauled him out of the building in handcuffs, the flashbulbs of the Seattle Times reporters illuminated his downfall for the entire world to see. The aftermath was a seismic shift in the corporate world. To save herself from accessory charges, Beatrice Gallagher immediately flipped, testifying against Richard in exchange for immunity. She admitted that Richard had ordered Harrison Croft to intimidate Chloe. Both Richard and Croft were sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, without the possibility of parole. As for Chloe, her life transformed overnight. Working legally through Thomas Abernathy and the federal government, she was able to claim the U.S. Treasury silver cash under maritime salvage and inheritance laws. The silver was auctioned through a private firm in London, netting Chloe a staggering $22 million after taxes. She didn't buy a penthouse or sports cars. True to her own passions, Chloe used the funds to establish the Arthur Pendleton Marine Conservation Foundation. 6 years later, Chloe Gallagher stood on the balcony of the glass lantern room of the Hollow Shoals Lighthouse. The storm-battered ruin was gone. The lighthouse had been meticulously restored, its gleaming white brick standing proud against the Pacific winds. The surrounding peninsula was now a state-of-the-art marine biology research facility, fully funded by her foundation. She looked out at the churning, grey water. Her father had tried to leave her with nothing, hoping she would drown in the cold reality of the world. He didn't know she was built to weather the storm. She had taken the ruins of her grandfather's legacy and built a beacon that could never be extinguished. What an incredible story of resilience and ultimate karma. If Chloe's journey from a disowned teenager to a millionaire marine biologist inspired you, make sure to smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that the truth always comes to light, and hit subscribe for more jaw-dropping true stories of hidden treasures and family drama. What would you do if you found that bunker? Let us know in the comments below.